Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. I'm hoping you guys are all having a fantastic day. I do apologize, I haven't recorded a video in a very long time. There was some pretty large weather events that I missed over the past 11 days, like the ice storm across the south and extreme cold, but I've been just extremely busy, so I did not really have the time, unfortunately, for that. However, I do want to start talking now about a potential really big winter storm that will actually come in potentially two phases, and both of them will be impactful, potentially severe weather, large snow amounts, and you can see what I have pulled up right here is actually the precipitable water value. So this isn't in the snowfall footprint of the potential storm. This is just how much moisture this thing could drag in with itself. This is more resembling of what we saw in late December, early January with those large systems that rolled off the West Coast, California area. And now that's going to happen again. We have the Pacific Ocean that's open, but there's still quite a bit of cold air. You know, it's February, so there could be some pretty nasty storms in the future here. And I'm just going to talk about the first kind of two, but I'm just going to merge it into one because they're going to be so interlocked with each other, but they're going to be kind of distinct, so I want to start talking about that. Again, if you are watching this from, say the northeast, southeast, just skip to your region, this northwest, right? I divide these videos by regions, so use a scroll bar to skip forward. There should be, the chapters, or go to the description box below, click on the blue numbers next to your area, and you don't have to watch me talk about the northwest, and you could just hear me talk about the northeast, or vice versa. So let's begin by looking at the northwestern United States and dissecting what impacts are headed for you guys. Now, for the Northwest, this storm is rather imminent. It's not far away, and we are again getting into a period of active weather for the Northwest. There's been a long break ever since, the extreme onslaught of snow, and, there actually have been some noticeable storms in the meantime, especially for Montana, Wyoming, Idaho. But now we're getting into a period where we could again see the moisture coming in off the west, not necessarily from northern Canada. The cold air will be a bit more limited, so you can see it's mainly rain until it reaches the mountainous areas. However, because of the extensive snowpack, again, warming is hard for these areas. So you can see that into even late today, we already see some pretty strong storms occurring, thunderstorms, very heavy snow, snow across the northern Sierra, into the southern Oregon, into Washington. Notice it's not a massive system, though it is rather powerful, has 999 millibars, so I mean it's decent, but the thing is that it's rather slow moving. You can see several bands of snow and rain overspilling into various states here through the night into early tomorrow morning. By tomorrow in the afternoon, so around 24 hours from today, notice that the precipitation is starting to abate from, say, Washington, Oregon. It shouldn't be too heavy, however, it will be falling for a prolonged period of time, so by the time all things are said and done, the amounts could be actually surprisingly high. Notice it spreads into Utah. Montana gets in on a little bit, but the eastern areas of these states don't really get in on this snowfall as much as, say, the western states, areas west of Wyoming and Montana, and western regions of Montana and Wyoming. Do note, though, that eventually some snow does make its way into potentially Wyoming and Montana there. So by the time all things are said and done through Monday, you can see that the total snowfall will be pretty robust, especially towards the higher elevated areas. You can see some foot amounts, 1 foot plus. Again, some of these areas haven't seen these amounts of snow in quite a bit, and not, just weeks-wise. Obviously, there's been much larger storms this season, so this isn't going to be anything incredible, but definitely still something that could cause some disruptions. Total rainfall, or I should say accumulated precipitation, including rainfall, you can see most of the higher amounts are in the mountains where the snow is, so the rain really isn't going to be that much of a concern. If you're in low-lying areas, this will be mainly a little maybe drizzle and whatnot. I don't want to put you guys into the long range to show you that this is not all what's, this is not just the only storm that's in forecast. Noticing after this moves out, we do see more precipitation across British Columbia, and just want to note that Alberta, Saskatchewan, British Columbia, you guys aren't really going to get too impacted by this first system. British Columbia maybe more so, but a second one will be moving in Tuesday. That will impact British Columbia and the coast of those areas very heavily. You can see some snow spreading into the mountains there bordering Alberta, and you can see this thing kind of intensifies. Idaho getting more snow there, Montana into the day on Tuesday and Wednesday. Not incredibly large, but still additional precip. And you can see, and another one comes in potentially on British Columbia into the day on Thursday. Really avoiding the northwest, though, as a high pressure kind of dominates and expels any rain trying to make its way in there. But if I play this very far into the long range, you can see the pattern. It's maybe not hyperactive, but there are definitely many instances of things we have to worry about. So again, the storm won't be necessarily massive here. Again, as this is just kind of one piece, it merges with moisture from the south Gulf of Mexico, which is why it turns into a major storm further out east. But for the northwest, nothing too bad. I do want to start showing you potentially now, or not potentially, I just want to start showing you the southwestern United States, as this is another area that will be arguably more impacted by precipitation. And you guys have had a larger pause in the precipitation. There has been some, but ever since that onslaught in January of those extreme amounts of snow and rain, it's been a bit of a, I should say that was more of December. It's been a little bit of a break, which is good. They needed that. But notice that already we have rain moving in really as I'm recording this video. This will continue into tonight. Let's go to the HER model, as this is a bit more precise and we're not that far out, so we could use the HER model to time this. So again, as I'm recording this, the precipitation is moving in. Again, heavy rain for a good portion of this, the cities. It won't necessarily be as concerning for flooding, because you could see there's a few storms, few heavier spots of showers, but they're rather progressive, so it doesn't seem that one area will be necessarily stuck under very heavy rainfall for any given time. Notice higher elevations easily seeing snow. South Lake Tahoe, Reno, Nevada, all seeing pretty good amounts of snowfall. Some of this activity, as you can see, especially earlier on, is going to be a little bit convective, so it's going to be hard to predict how this actually lines up and which areas see a lot of heavy rain. There will be some areas that see a very heavy downpour, while other areas may not necessarily see anything at all. But through the day tomorrow, this thing kind of starts waning out for much of California. Nevada still seeing snow. You could see Utah still getting that snow and actually probably intensifying into the day tomorrow. Arizona, New Mexico, you're not going to see much out of this event. Colorado picking up a little bit, but again, for the most part, by Monday, this thing is done for the western areas here, and you can see that the total snowfall may not seem too impressive, but 16 inches, 17 inches, obviously still a lot, but for the mountains, that's not, it's not a massive snow system. Still something that will cause some issues. Notice Nevada, Utah, Colorado, the mountains are rather small there, so that's nothing really to be too concerned about. Total precipitation, you could see more rainfall coming in, so that's definitely something that is going to be welcome for the drought-stricken areas. Again, there's been already a lot of rain, but at this point, this amount shouldn't really make flooding a concern, as it's not going to be too extensive. European model, if you look at it, you can see it shows a very similar scenario into the day. On Sunday, it spreads through Nevada, Utah, and it starts lingering and weakening as it spreads into Colorado, New Mexico, and Utah. So that is basically the forecast for the southwestern United States with this first system. Again, not massive for you guys, but it will turn into a larger storm out east. But that doesn't really concern you too much. Let's move on to the long range, because the unsettled pattern continues. Notice that through the Wednesday, Thursday, not necessarily anything going on that's going to be noticeable. Maybe some snow across Utah, Colorado from a northern system, but notice Saturday now into the potential weekend, we see another system moving in. Could also be dropping a decent amount of precipitation, snow, rain, and it's also pretty slow moving, so its impacts could linger. And then you can see another one moving in right behind this one, potentially also heavy rain, pretty slow mover, so that could also be concerned for some hydrologic issues with flooding and whatnot. Moving on into the previous model run that goes out a little bit further, as the newest one hasn't progressed fully, you can see these storms continue. Now, I wouldn't say any of these individually are massive, but one after the other, after a pretty, a short time in between them, the precipitation amounts add up, and there could be some places that still, pick up 6-7 inches of rain across the mountains. Lower elevations, maybe 1 to 2 inches. So again, I don't foresee this being a huge event, and nothing comparable to what we saw in January. However, you can see some of these amounts, especially towards the north here, in terms of altitude, 90, 100 inches, definitely not out of the question, and that's actually good. The snowpack will continue to be added on here, so that the reservoirs could get filled in with the spring melting. So that is that for the Southwest. Let's move on into different areas of the United States where, let's just say, this system turns into a much larger system, a much more impactful one that could be bringing a lot more consequences than compared to the West. So the next few days, Saturday, Sunday, all good. A little bit of chilly air. We just had a really cold outbreak across much of the Midwest. That's going to abate, and actually temperatures are already today on Saturday and Sunday warming up pretty drastically. But notice Monday, Tuesday, nothing really too noticeable. There will be a little system on Monday and Tuesday, late Monday, early Tuesday, across the upper Midwest. Will bring some snow into northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, southern Canada. Nothing really too incredible. However, this is where things get interesting, because this is not necessarily the storm we're worried about, but it leaves a cold front that starts to strengthen. You can see a lot of warm air kind of around these areas, not really cold for February standards. So once that little disturbance leaves, you can see we start seeing precipitation on late Tuesday, early Wednesday, start streaming towards the north with quite a bit of vigor. And you can see there could be some heavy rain, potentially severe weather concern further towards the south, but mainly a heavy rain concern. These areas aren't too bogged down with heavy rain in terms of the soils. It's not really, it's more on the drier side, if anything. So this shouldn't be a flooding concern of real magnitude. However, notice this thing starts developing into a classic potential snowstorm, and or at least a snowstorm shape. The good thing with this is that there could be, for the people that don't want the snow, there could be a lack of cold air, so the snow may not develop as it typically would, as well as it typically would. So you can see that there's a lot of rain mixing in here. However, if a scenario like this were to occur, we would see heavy rain across many of these areas further towards, kind of east of this low pressure, wherever it tracks, which the details are still very varied on, so I don't want to get into details, but you can see it does have a snowy side on it, and then potentially a second piece right here that develops into another system, but again, it's pretty connected with this first one. So the cold air following that first one could leave quite a bit of cold air for that second one to maybe bring some more heavier amounts of snow in. We'll have to wait and see. If you look at the most recent model of the GFS, I was showing you the one from the noon hours today, but if you look at the one that's just coming in, again, there's that first piece of energy, nothing really too concerning into Monday and Tuesday, Tuesday into Wednesday, but again, that cold front part of this system starts stagnating across the south, so this doesn't really affect much of the north central too much, but southern Illinois, Missouri, Kentucky do get some pretty heavy rain. Again, the cold air is on a collision course with this thing, but you can see with the most latest model on this thing kind of goes pretty far towards the east, so predominantly rain, right? So there still will be impacts from this. If you live across Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, you will be seeing quite a bit of rain, especially across areas that did see snow or still have snow cover and are dealing with very cold air which has frozen the ground, so the water absorption by the ground will be a bit weak, so this could cause some local ponding and whatnot. But notice with the most recent model run, it takes that snow energy piece that we saw further south here with that previous model run, it takes it up further north. Doesn't look like anything too intense for on Thursday and Friday, but notice it slowly starts intensifying, and you can see this thing quickly turns into a little spinning kind of bowling ball of energy that could drop quite a bit of snow across areas that haven't seen much snow this year, or just regardless a decent sized system, and that explodes further off the northeast coast. So for the north central United States, this could easily turn into a larger system if the first one tracks a bit further towards the north, more snow falls with it. But even if it does track further east like we saw with the GFS model run, that second piece of energy would therefore have potentially more snow potential across the Midwest. So you can see that while the amounts aren't necessarily incredible, there would be again a lot of rain towards the south, which we're not seeing just by looking at this map. Those snowfall amounts would be pretty significant if this were to occur. Notice total rainfall, again, pretty heavy towards southern Indiana, southern Illinois. I mean, there could be some 4-5 inch amounts. It's definitely not really something you'd like to see when a lot of the soil here doesn't really want to absorb that water. It's still frozen. We just had a very, very cold outbreak of rain, or of cold air. And yeah, that's just one model. The European, you can see, I'm going to show you right now, shows a little bit of different scenarios. Still shows that little energy on Tuesday and into Wednesday, but you can see again it starts stagnating, that cold front, and that develops into a storm. You can see the European takes a more northern trek with this thing, so it brings more snow with it into Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin. Again, which one is more accurate, the European or the GFS? We'll have to wait and see. At this point, I don't really see any of the two models being more accurate than the other one. Based on what the models have done this year and which one has been more correct so far this winter, I would slightly lean towards the European. However, we've seen both models kind of resemble inconsistency, and then notice this thing kind of drags out and potentially redevelops maybe some sort of a snowband there. So it doesn't necessarily show that second piece as well as the GFS there. Still, obviously the snowfall amounts would actually be arguably higher with this one, just further north. With the European scenario, you can see a swath of a pretty significant snow, and the rainfall would also be pretty darn significant with a system like this, especially towards the southern parts of the north central United States. Let's move on now into the south central United States. Now, this is an area that has, again, this storm is still far out, so the impacts are still a little uncertain on how this will impact you. But we do know that there will be warm air out ahead of this, so that at least that's something that's pretty certain. The low pressure comes in off of Colorado. Again, pretty weak, but the anomalies are going to be warm. So compared to what you guys have been seeing with that freezing rain, that ice, right? Texas was cold. Texas, I think, was like 12, or Dallas got down to like 20s in Dallas, so it's been definitely a chilly outbreak of cold air. You'll be seeing the complete opposite. Very warm temperatures into this week. You can see 60s, 70s. However, obviously that spells some action in terms of rain, and you can see that this initially starts off very weakly. However, we start seeing some pretty strong bands of rain, maybe some severe weather develop on Wednesday. The severe weather is still a little bit questionable. I wouldn't be too surprised if there were some severe weather threats issued here on at least a slight risk, or maybe even enhanced into Wednesday. Regardless, like you can see, it's very slow moving across one area for a long period of time, so a lot of the heavy rain threat is pretty significant. You can see this thing starts moving up towards the north late Wednesday into Thursday. Quite a bit of rain with this, dragging across Tennessee, Mississippi, Kentucky, across areas that still have relatively frozen soil from this cold air. And you can see not necessarily snow for you guys with this one. Again, according to the GFS is just one of the models that I'll be showing you. This thing is still far out, but you can see it shows mainly a rain system. However, just from that system alone, we could see rainfall amounts that are ranging potentially into the 4 to 5 inch range, especially across central Arkansas and southeastern Missouri. Do note, though, that's not the end of it. Behind it, we do see some cold air moving in. Some models show potentially more of a southern system developing here. Even the latest GFS, or sorry, not the latest, but the one from Yoon today, you can see showed maybe a snow system developing here on Friday of this week. So there's definitely activity and potential, and this one's kind of directly connected with how this first wave behaves, because with the earlier model of the GFS, it developed the system further west, and you can see it developed some snow across Missouri. But what it really did was staved off some of that cold air and that little piece of energy, and you can see it started developing it further south here. While with the newer one, it blasts off towards the east a bit quicker, so this wave gets a little bit further towards the east and stays a little bit further towards the north, and you can see that snow part stays up there, so it wouldn't have as big of an impact for the south central United States. However, by the end of the week, it still seems that there will be some cooler air moving in, and that will feel pretty drastic compared to some of these warm temperatures you'll be seeing on Tuesday and Wednesday of the first part of this week. European model, let me just show you the rainfall right off the bat. It looks pretty significant for a lot of these areas. Again, it would be nice to see this move a little bit towards the west, as these areas here are really dealing with a dry drought, if you will. But, Oklahoma, Texas, they'll still take some of that rain. They haven't been awfully wet, and they're still running relatively dry, the soils. Notice the European, again, it takes that little disturbance, starts developing potentially more snow into the panhandle, according to the European, so that's definitely something to watch for. It doesn't take much to create some activity, or chaos, if you will. Notice the rain pretty heavy according to the European again on Wednesday, and you can see this thing starts lifting off much more towards the north and west than compared to the GFS, and you can see that drops some snow potentially maybe even into Kansas, Nebraska. Again, potentially severe weather threat with a stronger system, so that's definitely something to watch for. But you can see likewise, like the GFS introduces that cold air, potentially some snow showers on the back of that, so we'll have to keep you guys tuned to the weather forecast, because the south central United States, you might not see snow, but again, depending on how the system behaves, there could be a decent severe weather threat. At least a flooding concern at this point is, that's like the least of what we're expecting. Okay, let's move on to the northeastern United States. This is where things really get interesting. So this system could really start developing into a larger storm across the northeast, and there could be kind of two systems that impact these areas quite significantly. Again, depending on which model you look at. In the near term, obviously, it was very cold. I believe we broke the all-time wind chill record across New Hampshire at negative 111 degrees, which is just almost unthinkable. And yes, that's like the national one, not just for the Northeast. So really, really cold air, but that will still continue. It will be warming. It won't be that cold, but it will be on a cooler side into, say, Sunday and Monday. Notice there's a system that comes right off the coast here, though it fails to make any meaningful precipitation or impacts. So we do start seeing the warming temperatures out ahead of this little disturbance on Tuesday and Wednesday. That's not the big storm, but it sets the stage for a system to develop further westward. And you can see this marches into the northeast. And again, it's going to be dropping potentially rain. So you went from you're seeing -6 across Boston, Massachusetts to seeing rain just a few days later. Further across southeastern Canada, there could be some snow. You could see initially maybe some rain, some ice, and then some snow. Again, whether or not the larger cities will be impacted by this remains to be seen. Better chance of seeing snows across Quebec, Montreal, Ottawa, or Toronto, and further, south across the St. Lawrence River Valley here, southwest. The chances are a bit less. Though, again, this is just one rendition of the GFS. The GFS itself isn't really in agreement with itself. You can see the track differs quite significantly, and I'll show you the European, which disagrees with the GFS. And then you can see the GFS, while it does develop into a pretty nasty system here, the potential largest system that comes in would be later here, and you can see it develops a immediate little guy that seems pretty small, right? But there's a lot more cold air left in behind this first system, so there's more snow. There's potentially some coastal activity going on here, so maybe some sort of also a larger, more significant system developing on Saturday. So I'm calling this one system because they're pretty much directly connected, but you can see what I mean by the fact that they're almost like two separate ones. Though you can see, again, with the second one, potentially more snow, more ice, more rain, a lot more impacts, and yeah, by the time all things are said and done, the snowfall footprint could be pretty significant, especially towards southeastern Canada and northern New England. Though again, this is still very changeable, so don't get too hung up on these amounts. Rainfall also pretty significant. Areas have very frozen ground here. It's been very cold, so the flood risk is a bit higher than it typically would, due to the fact that the ground doesn't really absorb water that well when it's frozen, and the warm up will be too rapid to completely thaw out the soil. Notice that the European again agrees with the GFS, keeps most of that precipitation off from this coastal system that will be developing, and it does show that little disturbance will bring a little bit of snow and rain into the day on Tuesday and early Wednesday, but that main piece right here, notice the European brings it further north. So what that means for the northeast is, well, it does bring in some precipitation, but it's really predominantly in a form of rain. Southeastern Canada, extreme northern New England, a little bit of snow, though it's not anything too impressive. But you can see that the European takes this system, shears it out, but it starts redeveloping it slowly, and potentially by Saturday, instead of showing a new kind of storm forming, it develops one off the older one, which could bring some pretty significant amounts into southeastern Canada and New England as well. And again, yeah, this thing will be dropping a lot of rainfall into potentially Ohio, Virginia, according to the European scenario, but the GFS, again, potentially favoring even more rainfall with that. If you look at a model like the Canadian, right, so the Canadian is not really one that I like too much, but I often look at it because it's still a decent model. So this is what it shows in the near term, nothing too different from what the GFS and European does. By Tuesday, Wednesday, there's that first little disturbance, but by Thursday into Friday, we see that first system moving in. Notice Canadian keeps it pretty far towards the north, but I do want to note, shows some pretty heavy snow just north of the St. Lawrence River Valley. Quite a bit of rain towards the northeast. I wouldn't say it's really heavy, but it's definitely going to be falling. And it, you can see, tries developing some sort of a secondary system on Saturday, Sunday. They maybe more of a coastal one, but it fails to do so. So it doesn't really agree with the European and GFS as much. But again, these systems are going to be pretty big, and yeah, it's still far out, so the details are still very blurry, but it looks like if it's a growing possibility for a large storm. And again, it will come most likely in at least 2 phases. Southeastern United States, again, this will be mainly rain for you, as these systems are going to be struggling to produce snow even further north. But what this does mean is that there will be quite a bit of rain, as again, this will be a prolonged system. I'm calling it one storm, but it really is 2 storms that are just one after each other, so I'm just coining it, kind of combining it into 2. The cold air that's been across the southeast with that most recent invasion, that will get moved out of here pretty quickly. And you can see Monday, Tuesday, relatively dry. Warming temperatures actually will be quickly getting above average, potentially seeing some very, very warm temperatures. So that's kind of going to be nice for you guys. But notice precipitation develops as early as Tuesday across the western areas here. Arkansas, Texas, Louisiana, potentially seeing quite a bit of very heavy rainfall. Again, depending on how this exactly unfolds, we'll have to wait and see where the heaviest rain falls, but it's definitely a concern. Severe weather as well, obviously a concern. And notice this thing barrels through the southeast through the day on Thursday and into Friday, though it weakens. Now, that's not all it. The GFS reintroduces another system, and you can see there's a bit more cold air with this. However, what this does for the southeast is reintroduce potentially some more precipitation across the Carolinas. Maybe, again, some pretty darn cold air towards the weekend coming back in for the southeast. But I do want to say this is just the GFS scenario. Obviously, total rainfall will be pretty significant, especially across Tennessee, northern Mississippi, Kentucky, Arkansas here. Maybe a bit less towards the southeast here across Atlanta, especially northern areas. A bit more maybe towards the coast that we see that second system redeveloping. European model, it does show that big system, but it's completely different. You can see it develops that one right there, but it's a more intense. The severe weather threat with this would be a lot more concerning. It drags that cold front at a stronger kind of scenario much further towards the east. So Atlanta, Birmingham, you guys are all under the gun potentially for some nasty severe weather there. And you can see it stagnates the system. So we start seeing a cold front redevelop, and this brings in much more heavier precipitation for that second wave compared to the GFS, especially again for the coastal areas of the Carolinas and Georgia and Florida. And the cold air behind it isn't as impressive as it was with the GFS. Total quantitative precipitation forecast just through, say, let's say next Sunday, Monday. Well, let's drag it out to when that second system's done. You can see there will be quite a bit of rain across the southeast. Some areas, especially where the thunderstorms occur, could be dealing with quite a bit of that heavy rain. But again, I'm more concerned about the severe weather threat with this, especially if a scenario like the European model comes together more than, say, the GFS, which that one looks more like a heavy rain threat, while the European looks more like a heavy rain threat, but it will be the secondary concern, as the severe weather would be the biggest one. So looking at the kind of the large scope, I just want to show you how big the system will be. So we'll obviously leave quite a bit of rain across the California area, the west. Right there, you can see it's moving in. That's kind of what we're looking at, and it will set the motion into very warm winds from the south, which drags in a lot of precipitation behind this little system here. Sorry, not precipitation, moisture for this cold front of this little system to start strengthening, and you can see it does so rapidly. The GFS does develop this into a more southern track compared to the European, but then develops a second system right here, which develops into a more large system. The European model, if you were to take a look at it on, let's just show you it on Pivotal Weather here. And let me click here, go to the forecast loop. You can see it does show again, a pretty dry but warming pattern towards the south. There's that little disturbance. So again, the models are in agreement about that. Does keep the system more towards the west, and it develops into a stronger one. So you can see the European is a lot more snow heavy for Wisconsin, Michigan there. Again, potentially more severe weather, as this thing is a stronger system. A lot of pull from the south there. And you can see this thing kind of shears out, but then potentially redevelops into another system. So it's looking like a pretty nasty one. We've had a pretty calm weather pattern these past few weeks in terms of these large systems. We obviously did have that ice storm warning across the south, but it wasn't necessarily a large cohesive storm. It was just these bands of precipitation one after the other that were producing a lot of freezing rain, and it doesn't take a lot of that to cause icy conditions and problems, which is why it was such a big deal. So again, this is kind of the first largest system in a good bit, and just to show you, the models have been pretty consistent with this. Yesterday, the European midnight model run has been showing this system, or showed this system in a pretty similar fashion. There it is, boom. You can see it redeveloped a second one, which developed a lot of snow potential across the northeast. Whether or not that will happen, we'll have to wait and see. The models are still jumping all over the place. Yesterday, Midnight's model run from the GFS also showed the system. You can see it took it more further south and east than it does with the current version. Still pretty similar to what it's currently showing, and you can see it redeveloped that second system in a similar fashion to what it shows today. And the long range, by the way, looks active. The storms look continuous, and the cold air, while it's not overwhelming, it's going to be there enough to produce more additional storms with additional snow. And you can see the most latest GFS model run obviously shows these two systems we've been talking about. You can see it runs through, but again, in a longer range, which we'll start getting to right now, you can see that the pattern stays active with another storm potentially brewing into the midweek of next week. And then here it starts getting a little bit weird with the data, starts kind of missing out on some of it. Here you can see it hasn't loaded, but notice it potentially shows a system that brings snow more further towards the south. So again, winter's not over yet, and we'll continue to see activity. You can see this is what it shows in the long range, another system, a lot of activity towards the west again. So we'll have to wait and see. For now, that's basically it, guys, and I will catch you all on the next episode. See ya. Bye.